Deep within the Forgotten Realms, an old power brews. Within her prison of Avernus, the first lair of the Nine Hells, the evil goddess Tiamat plots her rise to power, and she begins her attempts to usher in a new Age of the Dragon. Now, I know what you're thinking, Dinofax, this isn't your normal content. But, quite surprisingly to me, many folks want to hear about the wacky homebrew that is the Age of the Dragon campaign. And yes, it is a bit of a cliche title. This video will serve to give you guys some background to the campaign. And before we kick off, I'd have a couple things that I'd like to disclose. Firstly, this campaign was a first for a lot of folks. It was my first time being a DM, and it was many of my players' first time playing the game at all. As such, there was a lot we didn't know going into the game in the first place. But from my perspective as a DM, as long as all my players were having fun, we could figure it out. As I mentioned earlier, this game is a far cry from standard D&D and is very homebrewed. I used the rulebooks as more of a guideline and edited them to suit my campaign and my players better. We initially started off very traditional, but very quickly delved down the path that is homebrew. And another disclosure before we get started here. Many characters, places, and names are used and taken from other forms of media. As a group of newbies, it was much easier this way. I do not own the rights to any of those characters or names. They are in the game for use of parody and fun, of course. And once again, I do not own the rights to any of those characters from other media. But now let's dig into the heart of it all, the story. As you might have guessed, this campaign follows a group of adventurers as they try to stop Tiamat. In the year 1943 AW, nearly 2,000 years after her first defeat, Tiamat has gained enough power to influence the mortal realms. She has rebuilt the cult of the Dragon Queen, and together they plan to cause chaos to release her. Her cultists have enacted several rituals, sacrificing powerful artifacts and beings in order to tear rifts in time and space. These portals have allowed Tiamat and her cult to amass enormous amounts of power. But unforeseen to them, they were not the only ones capable of harnessing said power. And the portals had an additional side effect in that they opened up into other universes, allowing beings, creatures, and powers never before seen in the Forgotten Realms to enter for the first time. This all takes place within the continent of Bizomia. Because I'm a newbie DM, I happen to have named the capital city the name as the country. And because of how far we got before I started actually giving other cities names, I never changed it. So both the country and the country's capital city are named Bizomia. Anywho, within the kingdom of Bizomia are the loyal followers of Bahamut. After their victory almost 2,000 years ago, the country has known enormous prosperity and wealth. They formed an alliance with the good-aligned metallic dragons, many of which have forged close bonds with humanoids and their families. Many of the cities are designed specifically to be capable of housing dragons and their companions. Traditionally, D&D has two types of dragons, metallic and chromatic. But because of the way a lot of the dragons work in my campaign, I also added a third type, iridescent. These dragons can be either good or evil depending on their upbringing. The iridescent dragons are based off the dragons in Aragon, and as such, when they form a bond with a rider, it is much closer than your typical bond. However, I'll touch more on that in future videos. However, things have begun to stir within this lush jungle country. Strange reports have claimed that odd-looking portals have opened all over the world. Even more worrisome are the reports of chromatic dragons. Rumors begin to spread of many individuals amassing armies in support of their queen god. And yet, stranger still are the new beings. Creatures, monsters, and humanoids of every type have begun to appear. Many bear ill intent, but yet many do not as well. As the continent begins to descend into chaos and madness is where we find our players. So here's where more of that non-traditional D&D comes in. Now I know normally most D&D campaigns are between 3 to 6 players, and even 6 can be a lot. At one point my campaign had over 10 players in it, not including myself. And yes, it was a lot to manage, and yes, it was chaotic, but we all had a ton of fun. I will introduce players and their characters to you guys as they enter the campaign. So for now, I'm going to talk about those who were there from the beginning. The first person I'll introduce you to is Andel. Andel is played by a gentleman known as David. He is the only human in our campaign, and he's our party's resident paladin. Now, I'm not going to tell you too much of Andel's backstory because his character has amnesia at the beginning of the campaign. With his memory loss, he partnered himself with a pair of bounty hunters. He joins up with them in the hopes that he can find out his old memories as well as make some scratch on the side. And despite his memory loss, he has still managed to figure out that he owns a cabin, which is where our campaign will begin. With him at this cabin are his two bounty hunting partners, Aetha and Bjorn, who also happen to be two other PCs. Bjorn is a half centaur, half minotaur. Top half minotaur, bottom half centaur. Bjorn is our party's warlock, and he's constantly torn between doing the right thing and just murdering people. Look man, D&D patrons can be dark. Speaking of which, I suppose I should say viewer discretion is advised. This campaign is between friends, so it can be very brutal and it gets very cursy at times. Anyways, Bjorn took up bounty hunting as a way to get out his anger and keep his patron happy, while not just killing randomly. At the start of the campaign, he plays a Hexblade warlock, and he's played by my friend Justin. The other bounty hunter is a lizard folk named Aetha. Aetha is the only female character in the campaign, but you'd never really know it. Mostly because she's very cold and calculating, as she's played by a gentleman named Ty. Aetha is a wizard who took up bounty hunting as her profession. She figured it'd be a great way to have new experiences as well as hone her skills as best as she could. Next up, we have a Goliath monk by the name of Gertrude Malpractice Lawsuit. Yes, indeed, you did hear that right. Gertrude was played by my very eccentric friend Chris, and while they may be a Goliath monk, their background happens to be that they were a lawyer, typically defending clients in magical assault cases. He took this journey after demons murdered his family, and he managed to put those demons in jail, where they eventually escaped and were killed by a paladin. And now the tiefling whose devil father was killed wanted to sue the paladin who killed them, which was Andel. So, as our campaign begins, Gertrude is heading towards the cabin to serve Andel paperwork. Now, the tiefling in question happens to be another player character known as Xyrus. Xyrus has been looking for Bjorn and Aetha for a while now, but he hasn't been able to track them down. But after hearing about the paladin incident, he hired Gertrude because he knew that lawyers can always find a way. He was looking for them as he heard they were a powerful, monstrous duo who also happened to hunt monsters. And being a blood hunter, he wanted in on that action. Xyrus was played by one of my friends, Tyler, a different person than the aforementioned Ty. As a tiefling blood hunter with mysterious patronage, not a lot was known about him, and he made a mysterious addition to the group. Roosting in the mountain region nearby is an Aarakocra known as Phoenix Person. Phoenix Person was played by my friend Kyle, who chose to play as a ranger. Phoenix Person was an adept archer and quite content with his life, but he always craved something more. And upon their meeting, he decided that's where he was going. Searching through the woods nearby for material to make a new instrument is the bard known as Gimli. Gimli, as you might have guessed, is a dwarf played by my friend Derek. Gimli is a very stout and muscular dwarf, but he happens to have always had a penchant for music rather than for combat. Unfortunately, given his nature, he tends to get drawn into conflict rather often. This has caused his bardic abilities to be rather an extension of his fighting style, as opposed to focusing exclusively on support. And Gimli isn't the only dwarf either. We have another dwarf by the name of Brenthal. Brenthal is played by my friend Logan. Brenthal had originally wanted to become a blacksmith, but he changed his mind and ended up becoming a cleric instead due to his father's insistence. When he became a cleric in a town a short distance from the capital city, he was blessed by a priest of Bahamut, which has brought him here as a bodyguard for the lawyer, even if the lawyer doesn't really need a bodyguard. And the last, but certainly not least of these colorful misfits is an elf by the name of Ilharg. Ilharg is played by my friend Drew. Drew plays Ilharg as an elf with an Irish accent. And to be fully honest with you, no, I don't really know how that works. He technically has never been to Ireland or met anyone Irish and wasn't even technically raised with Irish parents. But nonetheless, he was the only one of my characters who chose to do an accent, and I let him do it either way. So as the only Irish elf in existence, he happened to be wandering through the woods when he found the group, including the lawyer. And around here is where our story truly begins. The PCs and their various characters will encounter multiple different types of NPCs over the course of the campaign. So I'll give you guys a quick rundown of some of the most important ones and why they're kind of important. Firstly, there's the King of Bazomia, Gazdan. He's been king for nearly 100 years after he stopped a civil war, and his reign has been focused on the prosperity of all his people. He's not only an incredible warrior, but a powerful magician. He is a true dragon rider, bonded with the dragon known as Gladier. Gladier is a colossal-sized golden dragon, one of the largest of his kind anywhere on the continent. It is said that he grew to such sizes due to Gazdan's close connection with Bahamut. But even a good king can't do everything alone. Gazdan has quite a few generals, all of which assist him with running the kingdom. This includes an Aasimar by the name of Vorthius, an Aarakocra by the name of Thea, a pair of elves known as Bard and Garad, a human by the name of Baranor, and a dragonborn by the name of Armagh. They all serve as Gazdan's top-ranking generals, with Vorthius being his right-hand man. Of course, there are a ton of other important NPCs, but as the party meets them, so too will you. And there you have it, that's what our campaign is all about. Now, of course, I didn't cover everything, and there's still a ton to go over. But this video is really only an introduction, plus I don't have the best editing tools as of right now. That being said, if there's anything else you'd like to know before the campaign videos start coming out, please let me know in the comments below. We started this campaign near the end of 2019, and I'm very excited to finally be bringing it to all of you amazing folks. Stay tuned, and welcome to the Age of the Dragon.